Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, good evening. I'm Jan Nelson, Senior Program Manager Lead in the Windows International Group and Windows Division.
I'm Cameron Lerm, Senior Program Manager in the Windows International Division.
And our talk tonight's about the Multilingual App Toolkit, an extension into Visual Studio. So let's go ahead and get started. Your clicker is
right there.
That one.
That was quick, one too many.
There we go. So we're going to go there. All right. So let's talk about creating a multilingual app toolkit with the Windows Phone today. So you build your rockin' cool app. It's got great features. Pretty excited. Test it and upload it to the store. Life is good. And then you start to notice that all the downloads are in English. Okay. You know, that's great. United States. But really would like to extend it out. So you add some resource files. You're going to go do some other languages, including the language that you speak. Got to add the bindings to the resources. That's after you thought you were done with the codes. There's a little bit of rework there. Get the resource files localized, which, you know, again, is something, additional job you've got to get done. You've got to figure out how to do that. Once they come back, you've got to be able to test the app in all of those languages as well. And then discover the bugs that require code fixes. And then manage all those different language files separately again. Apply the fixes, rinse, repeat. And so it can become kind of a job to ship in more than one language today. So I think that's the point of queuing up Cameron about, so why would I do that? So here's your slide.
All right, thanks, Jan. So one of the main reasons you do that is if, look at some of the research that AddDuplex has done. And they're stating that just for the Windows Phone, only 33% of Windows phones actually are activated in English, which means that you're missing out on potentially 67% of your market for your app. You want to make it so it's, you know, works in different markets, right? Very particular to the particular country. But most of the apps out there are not country specific. They're just language specific. So it's relatively easily solved. Again, the task of having to modify your resource files manually and going back through can be pretty extensive. So a lot of people that I've talked to who are actually multilingual don't even do it. So we're trying to solve some of that problem. I have an app that I wrote a while back, and I really don't do much with it, but I kind of just keep an eye on it. So I thought, well, those AddDuplex numbers are interesting, but how do they really apply to me? So what I did was I took my app and I said, okay, I shipped it with Russian and English because I have a Russian-speaking friend, and she said, yeah, I'll translate that for you. But I didn't do any other languages. And it's been out there, a year or two, year and a half or so. So I said, okay, what would happen if I put the ratios of AddDuplex against my actual downloads? And I'm just doing bars, not actual numbers. But what I did was I ratioed up the number of downloads I would have to have so that my English downloads would be the 33% that the AddDuplex says. And then the yellow bar, or the orange, sorry, that's blue today, isn't it? The blue bar are the bars that are my actual downloads ratioed to each other. So you can see I'm very strong in English. That, you know, and that covers Great Britain, that covers the United States, you know, South Africa, some of the countries that are very dominant in English speaking. Across the other languages, I get very few hits. Russian is obviously my second largest language other than English. The AddDuplex is almost exactly the same when I ratioed it out. So for my one app that I'm testing against, their percentages are working out for Russian. I've just uploaded my app with Spanish, Italian, French, and did another one I forget. It was so easy I forgot how many I did, but I did 4 more languages. So it'll be interesting over the next couple of months to see if those numbers start to ratio up with the rest of it. Now I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Okay. So with Multilingual App Toolkit, things are a little different. We have a common workflow between the Windows Store and the Windows Phone. We integrate directly with the Visual Studio IDE that includes the Express editions so that the price of entry to use the toolkit is as easy as it gets. We provide a pseudo-language so that you can go ahead and do some of the localization, internationalization testing without having to know a second language. Translation file export and import is very interesting in that we allow you to take those files and then hand them off either through an email or to some network share location that you want, so that if you've got if you're a small app developer and you've got somebody else you know casually who speaks another language who can support you, it's a very easy way to hand them those resources and bring them back in. You note that in the second, or the bullet after that, we talk about an editor that goes along with that. If they don't have a way to easily see those resources, we provide that for them. And you can see that we also use XLIF, which is an industry standard localization format, an XML format for containing those resources, so that if you were to hand those resources off to a translation vendor who's in the business commercially, they'll understand what to do with that file. And then to get the suggestions really quickly, we have full integration with Microsoft Translator Service built into the toolkit. So let's talk a little bit about the workflow.
Yeah, okay. So on the workflow, again, talking to developers, one of the things that they've said is, it's just a tax. I don't see the value, it's a tax. So we said, okay, how can we make it less taxing or a tax-free environment? So we don't solve the problem of you needing to actually put the bindings into your code. So you have to bind to the resource in that line. We figured that was something that would be nice for us to do, but it's outside the scope of what we're trying to do right now. Maybe sometime in the future, but we decided not to take that on. Although with Windows SDK 8, it puts in the comments header block for you, so you just copy and paste. So you don't even have to know what the code says. You can just copy and paste and put your resource ID in. So it's really easy to do. So you want to do that while you build your application. After that, we don't want to force MAT on anybody, the Multilingual App Toolkit, and so what we have is an enablement project. I want to have multiple languages. So you select that manually from the Tools menu. Once you've done that, we actually then add the pseudo-language to your project automatically, because pseudo is a great testing language. We do it here at Microsoft, and now we've made it available for third-party developers as well. And then you can say, okay, now let me select my production languages that I want. And for this example, in the highlighted, I've gotten French. So I'll just right-click on the project, go down and say Add Translation Languages, select the language I want, out of all of them that are available, pick French and build. Now I'll have an XLIF file with French, or with my translations from English in the file. Now all we have to do is translate them. And that's what we do on the next one. So I've built, because building is how we take the resources, gather them together, and put them into the process. So with phone, you can get away with not building the first time, but if you add resources, you need to build before they show up. With the store, you have to build before they show up at all. It's just it's a design of how it integrates in, so we don't interfere, but at the same time give you the flexibility. So you just machine generate, run your program. It really is that simple. And so enable, add, build, generate, run. And you have up to however many languages. I think the Microsoft Translator Service for machine translation supports 39 languages right now. So you can get 39 languages in less than 5 minutes. Now they're machine quality translation. And I would put a note in my app if I shipped that, which I actually did. I said, these are machine translated. Click here if you want to make them better. That way they can provide feedback, and I can actually show you in a little bit how I can give them a tool that they can actually do community translation for me. So we have a whole round trip available here. And enough slides. Let's actually get into a demo. So I'm going to go ahead and go into, let me minimize this. I'm going to go ahead and go into Visual Studio. And what I have here is I have just a sample little phone app that grabs weather. And the reason I've picked that one as my app, let me stop it here real quick, is because a weather app requires content from the internet. And content from the internet, we were actually having a conversation earlier, what language do I want the content in, right? It also has local resources. And you'll see in a moment that it also has resources that come from the operating system. such as calendar controls. So a weather app is a simple app, but it's a pretty good demonstration of what you need to think about as you go into multiple markets. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this. This is just straight app. It doesn't have Multilingual App Toolkit enabled. It's just localization ready with an English regex file. So let me go ahead and run this just to show you what it looks like, kind of get a feel for it. And you saw the little delay, went off to the internet, got current weather. You can see that, today's the current day. It's from Redmond. I'm getting it from the Renton Municipal Airport. And we have some sunrise, some basic data, and the copyright of the information that the service provider is, right? Standard scrolling around. I've thrown some big text up because I really want to know what it's going to be like in the next couple hours.
Showers.
Showers. Oh,
showers.
I don't understand the demos. They always say showers here. We need to talk about that.
Yeah, okay, let's go someplace like California.
So we have mostly cloudy, mostly still cloud. Oh, there we go. That's an improvement. We have rain now. Okay, but you can see I'm getting weather back. I'm getting a feels like. I'm getting time. I'm getting other information. And then I've got my week in the view. I've got my days of the week, and it's supposed to be sunny. You told me.
Showers.
So pretty straightforward app. I have the ability to change my location. No big deal. I'm not going to demonstrate that because we don't want to see San Diego with the sun. And I have the ability to change some configurations. Now, one thing I've done here is I want to give my user the ability to see multiple languages, especially with machine translation. I might want to ship Italian in machine translation because I don't have any resources or money, because I give this thing away for free, to have it translated. But maybe they want high-quality English rather than suggestion quality machine translation. So as I'm thinking about it, do I want to give them that option? And in this case, I do. So I have the ability to change my phone language. Now, as I said earlier, this app is only supporting English in an English regex file at the moment. We're going to fix that in just a second. So let me go ahead and cancel out and stop the program. So do you remember the workflow earlier where I said, first you write it so it's localizable by doing your bindings. You obviously install mat, which I've done. It's a 2 megabyte download. Doesn't take a lot of disk space. Then you enable it. So I'm just going to go to my project, Climate Observer, and I'm going to say, under Tools, Enable the Multilingual App Toolkit. It modifies the project. There's some hook-ins for build environments. There's a build task and some other things that hook into it. And then it creates that pseudo-language file I was talking about earlier. You'll see that I have it highlighted. It's a new extension that you're not familiar with, and that's that XLIF 1.2 industry file. And what I can do with this file here is I can right-click it and generate pseudo translations. Now, pseudo is basically just English with different markups on it, so you can see where your program is showing the different languages and where they maybe have a hard-coded string. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a pseudo generate on this. And I've got 27 resources that got generated. I'm going to press the F5 key, and we're going to start up again. Now, the phone can't switch to pseudo as a phone language. So my little ability to switch it over is a nice feature so that I don't have to worry about how do I display pseudo. So I can come in here and just say, show me pseudo language. Now, what I've done is there are some really fancy gymnastic tricks you can do to make this switch automatically. I decided just to go straight with Toolkit, and all I do is store the language that I want in isolated storage. And then when I load the app next time, I load up that language instead of the default one. So I exit the app and come back in for this demo. Now, this is interesting. I can't get weather. It was just working. So something changed when I applied localization that I want to debug, because it was working in English, but now maybe in Italian it's not going to work. So we'll dig into that in a little bit. But right now you'll see that I have pseudo. One of the things you'll notice on the pseudo is that we've expanded it quite a bit. Now, in a phone environment, truncation is actually part of the design. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you want to know how much of it you're going to have. Excessive amounts is probably a bad thing. You also have unique IDs, so you can actually have a tester log this bug. And even if you keep generating, this will be the same ID as long as the resource string doesn't change. So you can go find it quickly into your system. Oh, this is obviously not a localizable string. So I've got a localization bug there, right? Pretty straightforward. My location, actually, let me pull that back up, sorry. My location buttons, down here, these are pseudo, so now I know that I'm actually pseudo-localizing my app bar, which requires code behind because it doesn't work when you put it directly in the XAML. Another thing to consider that you would notice right off the bat. We got location. That's looking like I'm pseudo-localizing everything. Yeah, and we've also got our controls here, and it looks like I'm doing a good job on that. So I'm going to go figure out what's going on here. Now, the one thing I do know about my application is that I ask it to return the weather data in a particular language. And I told it to pseudo-localize the entire file. So what's happened, instead of wasting time debugging, is the language code that I told it, it put those hash codes in front. So now I'm telling it basically junk, give me back junk language, and it's going, I don't know how to talk that language. So let's go into our pseudo file. We'll pop up our editor. This is a standalone editor that allows you to work with people who aren't in Visual Studio. So if you have a friend who speaks pseudo, well, in this case it'd be Italian, you could send them your xlib file, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. They can use this free editor, which is the same install point, but it won't install any of the Visual Studio components if they don't have it installed, or if they choose not to through a custom install. They can edit this file and send it back to you. Now, I know that my pseudo problem is right here because my demo, and I've worked at before. So I'm just going to reset this string, and I'm going to tell the weather service, what do we want for a language back from our weather service? Italian? We seem to be stuck on Italian tonight. So I'm just going to give it the language code for Italian, save this, and then run again. And now our language service is returning Italian as the language, right? If it doesn't understand the language, I would actually change my code to produce a better error result rather than couldn't get weather, because you want to tell them to have a different preference. But now you can see I can actually have my app in pseudo and have my consumer data in Italian. So that gives me all kinds of flexibility for my target audience. Maybe I want my language in Spanish because I'm learning it even though I'm a native English speaker. That would be an interesting scenario to add in. How do you want your weather today? Maybe it gives me the opportunity to look at my Celsius degrees rather than Fahrenheit all the time. There's all kinds of fun stuff you can do with it. Again, configurable for your customer, but also required because you're talking a global market and to global services. The other thing we'll look at down here is my sunrise and sunset. Those are expanding quite a bit, so it's probably going to be problematic in my design. I've got an interesting area here where I seem to have some type of wrapping in my feels like. But notice on the time, the P and the bracket afterwards, right here. This is not something we're pseudo-localizing because we don't have the codes on the top. So that's actually coming from the operating system. So the Windows Phone, very limited amount, but it does have pseudo-language in the operating system. So now what you're seeing, I have content from the internet, I have content from my pseudo version of my resource file, and I also have pseudo content coming from the OS controls themselves, which is interesting when you want to start working with calendar, time and dates, those type of controls. It's a good way to test to see you're actually using the calendar controls instead of formatting your own strings, which would be very difficult to do and go into multiple markets properly. So again, I still got my date problem there. I'm getting Celsius. That's from the service. I'm telling the service to give me default, so that makes sense. Again, I have a few more controls with time on it, and they're still doing the pseudo. And then I scroll over to my week, and my Thursday is also pseudo-localized. But again, I don't have my identifier in front, so that means these days are coming from the operating system, which is very useful when I do switch to Italian finally, because now it will actually say it in Italian rather than English. So my app will automatically adjust as we move forward. So let's go ahead and I've got all my things here. Let's force the thing to Fahrenheit, right? So now we're getting our degrees in Fahrenheit. Again, I'm able to give customer preference. I'm able to tell the weather service. While it's not necessarily localizable data, is customizable data that's on the same scale as what language and what degree system do I want. Okay? So that's pretty straightforward, but no one really wants to ship pseudo, right? The other thing I'll say is I did test my app recently. I put pseudo in it and shipped it to the store. It passes certification. You may not want to add the resources just because they're useless, but it won't block you from being certified if you do forget to uncheck pseudo. So let's go ahead and add in some more interesting languages. So I'm going to right-click this. At least I think I am. There we go.
There you are.
And I'm going to select Add Translation Languages. Now, we opted not to put it under the standard Add menu, and we've gotten some feedback that we might want to reconsider that. But this is not something you're going to use all the time. So we didn't think it made sense to go in there. We thought we wanted it easy access, add once, and then not worry about it. So let's go ahead and add in Italian. Okay, and we can do the different flavors, but I'll do Italian, Italy, just for the sake of argument. How about Japanese? Japanese is always interesting.
You'll note that there's some little icons to the right of some of these. It says Microsoft Translator, if you can read that. And so what we're doing is we're grabbing the available translation languages and then populating this. So as the translator team adds them, your list will continue to change and grow. And you just know what you can get machine translations for when you select those, so you can get those translation suggestions pretty easily that way.
Thank you. Another good point on that is, since it is machine translation, it's language agnostic. Means it's just going to be, in this case, Arabic, not targeted at Saudi Arabia, right? So it'll be like just German, generic German, not German, Germany or German Austria. So when you're thinking about the language aspect of that, that's interesting. A caveat on that is that also means I can support a limited set of language fallback. So I can select German, and then I can tailor for German Germany maybe 5 strings that are particular for that country's version of the language. And if those 5 strings aren't the ones I'm using, just go to the generic German that works for everybody. So you don't have to translate all of your different flavors of German to get a good German experience, just a few that you wanted. And there's ways to control that and say, I don't want to localize these ever, and it will just go into the system. This is a pretty good hit. Let's go ahead and take this. So again, you'll see that it's adding the extra files to the system. Now, there's one thing I want to show you that might mess people up. If you're familiar with how to do localization, you know you make a resx file that has the language code in front of it. Well, if I open this, I'm going to go, but where's my strings? Because the only thing there are the 2 strings that the Windows 8 SDK puts in, and that's your language code to help you load the right fonts automatically, as well as your flow direction. We take care of that for you. The resources are stored in your XLIF. We populate the resx file for compilation. So you don't want to go modify your resx files for your strings, because we're going to override them. So if you see this is empty, there's only 2 reasons why. 1, you haven't built, or 2, you said, I actually don't want that string translated, so we leave it out of the file to enable fallback. Okay, that's a key point to remember as we move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and, actually I'm going to open these in the editor because I know I got my language issue, or I'll do the wrong language. So let me go ahead and load this up. Pretty sure I double-clicked that. I did. Okay. Now I have the ability to say translate all. The other thing that I can do is, since I know I have this language thing, I'm going to change this one to be ar.sa right off the bat, because that's the language I want. And then I'll just say translate all. When you translate all, it knows the translation state, and it won't mess with anything that is anything other than new. So even if it needs review, it will assume that you're just in a workflow state, and it won't override it.
So the fact that you changed the state,
Yep.
and so it didn't override it when you said translate all.
Yeah, because my little icon here, which you can sort on, says that it's translated. And so since it was translated, the process through it said, oh, that's already been handled. I'm not going to machine translate that for me. Which is interesting because it gives you the ability to do some translation and then some machine translation and not where they're going to collide. Okay.
So there's a pretty sophisticated workflow embedded in this little tool set that actually could scale beyond that informal user, along with the pseudo hashtag and the ability for tests to hook up automation, start building some very interesting scenarios if you want to scale this up a little bit.
Yes. All right, we'll make Italian here. And go to our Japanese. Oh, I forgot to localize that one. Oh, that's an interesting part for my demo then. Apparently, I've already done the Japanese one. It must have been on disk and it just pulled it up. So we'll just stay with that. Now, one thing I forgot to do is actually do translate all when I was in Italian. So now that I know I've marked my strings so they're already marked as translated for the ones I need to be a particular way, I just go ahead and generate from inside Visual Studio because it will, again, ignore the one that's been translated. Again, just run. Who here has actually done multiple languages in the ResX model of .NET? Okay. Does this look a little easier?
Yes.
Good.
Good answer.
That's the right answer. Check's in the mail. So we'll go ahead and do our languages. Any language preference?
Arabic.
Arabic. I knew it. Yep. Arabic is always a fun one, isn't it? Again, I need to exit and restart because of the way I haven't overridden the language manager, but you could. And here's Arabic. Notice when I scroll, actually, I'm scrolling the wrong way because I should have gone the other way to get to my week first. Again, I still haven't fixed the day one. That's a pretty easy one to fix. Now, here's something that is a bug. My buttons aren't mirrored. And the reason my buttons aren't mirrored is because they're code behind. And so I just said, if you're familiar with how to add buttons and code behind, you basically say, you know, application button control, add, add, add. Well, it's going to list them in the order you added. And I don't want to say it's a bug in the phone SDK, but it doesn't change the order based upon the locale. So you would in code just basically say, what is my flow direction? And if it says right to left or left to right, you would then just add the buttons in a different order. It's a pretty easy workaround, but it's something you'd have to consider. Again, who here can read Arabic? Okay, but here's an important part. It doesn't matter if you can read it or not, because you know approximately what it's going to look like if you ship it with machine translation, or even if you have it professionally translated. You can look at this and go, you know what? Things look like they fit, or they look like they don't fit. I should make some design adjustments. So not only does machine translation give you the ability to get into a market that maybe you wouldn't have gotten into before because you have no language services there, it also gives you the ability to make that language, your target market languages, your test languages, easily. So now I can fully test Arabic, I can test my functionality just like I did with pseudo, and I can make sure we don't have any issues.
And you can do some design work off of it, since you can see what it's going to look like in the final result. And the translations are probably close enough in length that your layout, you can look at your layout and decide what you're going to do about that. And if you are going to talk to a translator, you can give them specifics and say, hey, you know what? For this string, I really need it to be a little bit shorter. What can we do? Is there another term that we can use? And have specific conversations that will help fine-tune something if that's indicated.
So Cairo, C-H-I-R-O.
C-A-I-R-O?
Yeah, that's right, C-A.
No H.
Yeah.
A-I-R-O.
Let's see if that pops up.
Yeah.
Ah.
Nebraska.
So, yeah, Nebraska. Let's pick this one that looks like it's not in the US. So here's our weather service for Cairo. And you notice that most of it's coming back in Arabic, but we still have some data that's coming back from the service in English. Not much I can do about that, except maybe pick a different provider. This is the MSN provider. But all in all, that works pretty straightforward, pretty easy. I think that's about it for how the toolkit works. The things I really want to emphasize is the amount of time we spent dealing with language issues is in how the program responds to it, not how do I get translations or how do I manage translations. I know in my app, I have English and Russian, and this is before we had the toolkit for the phone, I made the mistake of adding my resources into the Russian language and not adding in the English language. And I was testing in Russian, and everything was fine. And I went and switched over to English, and I was like, there's something missing. And my English resources had no fallback because English is my default language. And I literally just had gaps in my UI where I should have had English, because you need to manually modify the files. You need to manually move the resources between all your resexes. We take care of all that for you. Stay in your native language. Let us manage the rest, and it'll just work. If you already have an application, and I don't have it set up to demo that, but if you already have an application that has multiple regex files, we actually provide the ability to right-click, and it won't show up here because it knows the scoping of it, but if a regex file was here, I could right-click, and there would be a menu right up here that would say Convert to XLIF. So then you could roll your existing language files into our management system, preserve the languages, because it will do a string and source and target compare against your language neutral to this language file. If the strings are not identical, it will say, oh, you've translated this, and we'll mark it as translated, and it will be preserved. So now you can use MAT, convert your existing ones to the language system, and then add new languages on top of it. So we've tried to approach all the different avenues on that.
Let's show how we export and import.
Good point. So I'm not really comfortable sending to the Japanese market machine translation. So what I would do with that is I would simply right-click it, and I would say Send for Translations. Again, it's an industry file, so I'm just going to do a file folder because I don't want to spool up my email client. And I would just put it out to wherever I'm going to put it. I'll just throw it on my desktop for now.
Or maybe on your SkyDrive, and you've given that translator
or
access.
I could go to my SkyDrive.
You think about how that might work.
Yeah, go to a SkyDrive, go to your translator's shared folder, drop the files in, shoot them off an email saying, hey, these are ready for you, let me know when they're done, right? So I'll throw it on desktop for now. And then as a translator, let me get out of the demo. As a translator, I would find this on my SkyDrive account. I would have, this is where I should have brought this client up. When you email, we put the URL to actually do the download of the toolkit. It's embedded in you just click on it, and it will install just the editor for a localizer's machine.
Yeah, it'll look and see. Do you have Visual Studio installed? You don't? Okay, we're just going to give you the editor. And so we don't burden them with a full installation of Express, say, but just what they need.
Yep. So, and if they just hit next, 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 they don't configure, it will do the right thing. We've done a lot of work to make sure that happens. So here's the file in SkyDrive. I just double-click the file. I've installed the toolkit. I'm editing. I make my changes. And that would then result in this going from needs translation to translated, because it was human. As soon as you keyboard it, it knows a human's working it, and it knows that it works into a translation state. You still may want to go to final and signed off, but just setting it to translated would give you an indication that they've touched it. Again, anything that's not new, we consider translated, because we believe that most developers who are writing apps just don't want to get caught up in the workflow. But we know there's some that really care, that really, really work on the language. Maybe they have multiple friends with multiple languages, and they're producing maybe a higher dollar app, and they want to make sure that only quality translations go out. This would enable that workflow for them. They can quickly do a filter, and they could simply say, show me everything that still needs a review, right? And boom, here's everything that still needs a review. So they can filter in. Again, we've kept it lightweight, but we've also given them some tools to dig through.
There's a nice lock state also that we should probably show.
All right, so let's say, like Climate Observer. That didn't get machine translated because it was all caps, and the translation service says, well, if it's all caps, it's probably want to be left alone. But let's say I didn't want to leave the whole thing alone. Let's say I have weather location. That one translated? That one wasn't translated. Why didn't that translate? Okay, it did now. So let me reset this. Maybe I only want to translate location. I want to keep weather. So what I do is in the source, I would say, for my source, don't translate weather. These are, again, this is the XLIF standard, and we show the markups because people who are familiar with it would know what to do with it, and people who aren't wouldn't use it. But this tells our machine translation engine, don't touch it. whether we're sending it out for professional translation or machine translation or our pseudo, it says this is critical that you don't touch. And if I translate this now, it will only translate the location portion of it. Now, we're not pretending that if you do languages where you have verb switching like Spanish, that it's always going to be in the right order. When you do this type of markup, that's when a professional translator or a language expert knows how to manipulate and move things around. But if you have a product name that you don't want translated, this makes it really easy. You can just mark it as don't translate my product name because I want it to be, it represents my company, not the app, so I would not want it translated. The other option that you have also is you can say this particular resource for this particular language should never be translated. And what this will result in, if I were to go back to save this and go back to the project and build, this would not be in the resx file, in my Japanese resx file. And the reason why is it's not in the file, it enables fallback. So since my neutral language is English, on a Japanese phone running this in Japanese, I would see sunset in English because I've said sunset should never be translated. So we have granularity of in string and then just the entire string. We do provide a way to manipulate that around. So again, we believe that pseudo is the best file to start working on. You can do all your debugging work in pseudo. So what we've done is given the ability, and I'm not going to demonstrate it except for bringing up the UI. We've said, let me apply all my locks, all my internal those marker tags that we put on. Let me apply that to all my pseudo. Get my program debug, mark these as don't ever translate these, like the weather code I want for the language to come back in. And then I can just say, okay, what languages do I want to apply that to? And I can say, if I've put a lock on a string and that string's already been translated in other languages, either overwrite that language, in other words, lose the translation to get the lock put in place because it was wrong anyway, or if I've already translated it, I'm going to assume I did it right. Now what I can do is I can mark up a few key things like my product name and then distribute it across all of my language apps, all my language EXIF files to say everybody conform to this now, rather than having one global one that is less flexible. And then I can go in and tune it independently if I wanted to on top of that. So again, really tried to keep a workflow minimal, but available for people who wanted to go farther. We figure most won't use the workflow, and that's perfectly fine with us, but we wanted to allow to go farther if they wanted.
So we started out saying that this had a common relationship with Windows Store apps as well.
So that's a great question. So it's like, you know what, I've got this really cool tool, my phone works great, but I got the same app for the Windows Store. And I really don't want to have multiple res.json files or multiple res.w files because it's painful. So let's not. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a real simple demo app. And we call this one Wolf. It's kind of an older app that we did just as we were originally doing this. But Wolf, again, is a program that is written to be localized. It's already localizable. We've put all the resource strings in. We actually have written it in both Visual Basic, JavaScript, and C# just to show it works with all the languages. Any language that uses the resx or in the store, the JSON or res.w formats, we work with, even C++ apps, even though those are more challenging. They just are. The project structure is really strange. So what I have here is I have Wolf. And Wolf is basically a really kind of a simple, fun app. And make sure I'm in English here. So how many people are familiar with the language selection in Windows 8? I wonder why. So the way that Windows 8 works is you have language preferences rather than language selection. So with the preference, I can say, please show me this language, all my apps in this language first. If they don't have resources in that language, show it to me in the next one on my list and the next one on my list. So what I'm going to do for this little demo here is I'm going to put English not at the top. Let's do German, because the Germans love my machine translations because it makes their day for a good laugh.
Before we leave this screen, you've got English QPS-PLOOK there, and I think it's an interesting point that you brought up in the Windows Phone that there was some limited pseudo-localization in the Windows OS. There's actually extensive pseudo-localization that's been shipping in the Windows OS for several releases. It just isn't something that you find in the list. You have to ask for it.
So that's a good point. I'm going to remove it temporarily to show how you find it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So in Windows 8, you just say, you go to the control panel, you go to languages, similar you did in Windows 7, only now you just say add a language. And that brings up a new UI that lists all the languages that are available on your particular machine. Up here, as everywhere in Windows, we have the search key. Well, I can't search for pseudo and be successful, but I can look for the language code. So memorize this. It is documented, but you got to memorize it. QPS-PLOC. Got to type it right. When you type that, it will then show a language that's not normally displayed. Sir?
TLH-QAAK.
Yeah, no thanks. And the reason why this doesn't normally show is pseudo's not any good for a standard user unless they're really, feeling like they want to have martyrdom. So I'm going to go ahead and add pseudo back in. And now what I have is I have pseudo as one of my available OS languages. So my application is going to display pseudo English, which means anything from the operating system will show up in pseudo, then German, and then English. Now, for the Wolf app, it's a really simple app. I'm just displaying images and resources from my app. So I'm not really accessing calendar controls, or I'm not accessing the internet. So I won't get that variety we had in the store app. But let me go ahead and run this. I love it when demo machines actually work the entire time.
So far, so good.
That was a hopeful statement. So again, this application, I was afraid that was going to happen. All right, that's a screen resolution issue. Let me fix my screen. Sorry if this messes up the recording. I need to go up or down. Let's try going up. I think maybe we're going to go down. So what that message was is that it wasn't a resolution that Windows apps support. So let's go down a resolution. And I believe it supports this one just fine. So we'll go ahead and go back to VS. And we'll run this again.
There it is.
Ta-da. So that wasn't Matt. So here's a really simple app. It's just kind of fun, showing a bunch of dogs running around. The team was teasing me one day, so I came up with a dog app. Pretty straightforward, nothing real fancy. Standard tile, Windows 8 app. Everything's in English, no surprises there. So again, we go back into our app, and this is a C# Windows Store app. What menu do we go to enable Matt? Tools menu, right. So we enable Matt on our Tools menu with the project selected. There's our pseudo file. And this is that one case I was telling you about. With Windows Store, the pseudo file is empty until you build. We synchronize during the build, and then we inject in. So it all happens in one step, but you always have to do the build, then localize, and then one more build. It was a design choice we made that has served us pretty well, as long as you remember that one gotcha. So I'm just going to do just a build. So I'm just going to build the solution. And you can see here we have successfully started and finished our build with the Multilingual App Toolkit. That's always a good thing. Now if I bring this up, then I'll have my pseudo in my file. It's been populated. Pretty straightforward. Let me go back to the editor. I wanted to show one thing in particular. I am going to translate into pseudo happy dogs and unhappy dogs. And that's it for this demo. And I'm going to run this. I'll add German in a minute because I want to make sure we step through everything slowly. Yep. So now you'll see that we have the language fallback working. Remember, my OS languages are pseudo, German, then English. This application supports 2 resources in pseudo, the rest in English. So that's what's being displayed, is the 2 pseudo, because they're the preferred language, and then everything else is in English. So You can also then tell where this same resource is being displayed multiple times. See the code? If this was the same string but a different resource, it would be a different code. So again, that helps you in debugging about why is that string the same or why is that string different? You run it in pseudo and go, you can identify then, and then you can actually search on that code against your resource file, your pseudo resource file, and say, oh, it's this particular resource name. Let me go hunt that in code. So it gives you clues. And let's go back here and let's add German, because I know I speak that so well.
Ja, ist gut.
Gashu. And we'll do German. And yeah, we won't get complicated. So let's translate everything except, see?
Got to build first.
Got to build first. You're too used to the phone. You don't have to build first when you initially do it in the phone. So let's translate everything except we want to untranslate the free flea dogs. And why do we want to do that? Because we want to make sure that we do actually still get fallback to English. So again, translate, build, translate, run. So now I have happy dogs in pseudo. I have my content in German.
Machine translation quality.
Machine translation quality, which is a great suggestion. Actually, the interesting part is the Germans laugh at it because there's grammatical errors. But when I translate to French and show it to native French speakers, they actually go, that's not bad. And the Brazilians go, that's not bad. So that's kind of encouraging. Again, if you use machine translation, I'd always just put a disclaimer. Machine translated for your convenience, and then provide them a link because they can download the toolkit, run your Excel file, and fix it for you.
And we'll show them that loop.
And we'll show them that
in
loop.
a little bit. Yeah.
So here we go. This is still in English because I don't have a translation for it. Everything else has a German translation, and the two strings have pseudo. Now, let's back this off a little bit just to drill the point home. If I bring this back up and switch my order, so I'm going to move this up. Now I'm going to do German, then pseudo. Now what should happen here is I won't see any pseudo at all because I did actually translate these into German, so it doesn't fall back. So again, your language fallback and your ability to do interesting things, like if I were to translate German, Germany, and it's just general German, would work very well in this scenario. Oh, sorry, and I got my one English string still because it's still not translated. All right, pretty straightforward. Any questions on that? All right. And you want to show the input?
How, with the suggestion coming back, how people could actually give feedback on whether or not the quality of the translation was good.
Oh, okay. You mean as far as your localizer?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring up our German file. What if I have it in this one? Actually, let me back up for 1 second.
Okay.
I'm going to deviate from my demo and hope it doesn't bite me. So I want to actually add some, oh, I do have comments on here. All right. So you notice in here that I have comments on my resources. These are very useful to communicate to the person who's going to localize for you, because what we do is those are comments that we call from the developer. So they'll show up right here. This is a comment to the localizer, pretty generic comment we threw in just as a test. But you can write in here that this string represents this, or maybe it's a button, so please keep the translation short. Some type of what you'd want to tell them in person if they're asking questions about it. Now, what they can do to you is they can actually type back, and that is, this translation, right? Can I spell translation? I can't type on these small keyboards. Is perfect, right? And they can send this back to you. And when they do, you can open this up and you can look at the translations and go, you know what, I've got different translations on here. And okay, great, so this is good. Or they can say, I don't know what this meant. Right, is the classic example we've used for years is the bat in the field, right? So let's say you had a resource that said the bat is in the field. What's your localizer going to come back with? Are you talking sports or mammals, right? And you can go, oh yeah, sorry, this is a baseball app, right? So this would be sports instruments. So you can communicate with that way, which ideally would be a dev comment you would send to them initially. So you can round trip this, and it will, during builds, during imports, they'll all be preserved, and they'll continue to grow. The only one that changes dynamically on you is the one that you have in your resource file. If you change that, we will change it elsewhere because you've made an adjustment to how the system works. But that's a great way that you can communicate back and forth without having to do an email. They can send you back the file and say, hey, I had some questions on these resources. And you can go find it like that. I think that pretty much covers everything. Yeah.
Is the resource ID checkbox on the top, does that enable the GUID?
Is enabled?
The GUID that displays in the UI for testers. Is that shown here by turning on the resource ID checkbox?
It's the GUID only shows in the code. You mean the resource tracker code? That only shows in the pseudo one.
It's not available here.
We could enable it. We haven't, but we could say what would be the ID for this resource, because it would generate to be the same one here. We just haven't put it into the editor yet. Again, this is more of the translator one, and we didn't think they'd be working with pseudo, but it might be interesting to reconsider. If I showed my pseudo file, it would just show it as part of the string, and you could then search for it. Right? You could then search for it if you wanted, and it would show it up, or even filter on it. The other thing I didn't really call out is we indicate whether it was machine translated or not. As soon as you start touching it, not only do we change it to a translated state, we take the machine translation flag off. So you can filter and say, hey, what's machine translated? I can quickly just say, show me all my, sort by my column, here's my 2 strings that are still machine translated. And pseudo is machine, so we mark it as machine. Again, that's that workflow that people may or may not use, but we want to enable it. So how many are going to write an app that now has more than one language?
Good answer.
You showed Japanese. Is there some sort of support for phonetic or Yomi designation?
Not directly in the toolkit. If you want to do different things, such as control the sizes of maybe a dialog box or a window, something like that, make it a localizable field, and then you can put it. Then you can translate it, and you got to be careful because you don't want to translate a number with to something else. But then you could the translation would be grow this from 100 pixels to 200 pixels for this particular language. Obviously, we prefer you auto size, but that would be how you do fonts and other stuff through a localization model.
I've seen websites that have community localization where you can dump your resources and then people come in and either translate it or they vote on the translation. Is there, I've never localized anything, so I don't have any experience. I'm getting very motivated though. Is that something that's easy to integrate with, those types of websites? Maybe they export the, what is it called, XLIF?
XLIF?
XLIF, yeah. So I'll take most of that answer offline, but right now the way that we integrate is through the send and receive functionality. You can send it through an email, they can send it back to you, and you can import. The import will actually do some validation. So that's currently the way that we support that.
And we will have an offline conversation at the end of this talk.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And everything we've shown here is publicly available. This is version 1.2. You can download it today and do exactly what I've done. Nothing here is internal to Microsoft at this point. All right. Well, thank you for listening.
Appreciate your time.
Feel free to contact either Jan or myself. We'll give our email alias offline, and ask us any questions you want, or if you're going to expand into doing it either for the store or for the phone, we can definitely provide some help.
Or for both.
Preferably for both.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.